This is such a exciting moment. Today we're rolling out 2 new production-ready Gemini models.
I think what's really cool with the age of AI is seeing anyone, even people who are not technical, being able to build their own AI apps.
I really can go and tackle 10x more difficult problems now because I have AI as a co-pilot. For the person who's never coded before, they're now able to tackle any problem with code because they have this co-pilot in their hands. The most successful individual contributors, creators, managers, and designers, the people who are most successful are the people who are going to be building with AI tools. There's so many cool products to be built. You have the idea as you're coming up with use cases for what's the new stuff that's being unlocked by the latest iteration of Gemini models, like even for me in the last couple of weeks. And it's like, well, there's a lot of really interesting companies that you could go and build or products to be built.
We're so early in reality. If you're keeping up with things on X, reading newsletters, keeping up with YouTube videos, watching podcasts like this, you're probably already in the 1% of early adopters. All right, thanks so much for joining me today, Logan. Let's get right into it. So there's a bunch of new announcements by Google today. Can you give us a rundown of everything announced and why it actually matters?
Yeah, Rowan, this is such a exciting moment. I think we've been getting developer feedback for the last 5 months about all the Gemini models and how to use them. And today we're rolling out 2 new production-ready Gemini models, and also improving a bunch of the things that have been the sources of feedback from developers around rate limits, around pricing for 1.5 Pro, around some of the filter settings enabled by default. And really all of these are focused on enabling developers to go and build more of the stuff that they're excited about. So these are sort of the follow-up culmination of all of those experimental models that we've released over the last 2 months. And again, I keep getting pings and DMs from people telling me how much they've been waiting for these models to actually roll out so that they can really start building with them. So that is the rundown.
That's amazing. And something I want to say is what's really cool, and I don't know if the pace has actually changed since you have joined Google, but at least in X, you've done an amazing job in shedding light on all the innovation happening and all these announcements coming out every single day. My follow-up question is kind of regarding the announcement is what exactly makes the new model so unique?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's maybe less so of what makes it unique and more so just like the general trajectory of the trend that we're on, which is like the models coming out of, and part of one of the best parts of my job is getting to work with the folks at Google DeepMind, and I think I have such conviction in that team and the direction that they're heading in. So I think it's more so at least the way that I've been thinking about this from a developer perspective is the sort of path, the linear amount of progress that we've seen with, and in some cases exponential in different benchmarks with this iteration of Gemini models, even from I/O where I saw you last on the Google campus has been incredibly exciting. And it's a bunch of the things that developers have given us the feedback around, the models not punting on as many questions. They want the model to just sort of respond to the questions that they ask and not sort of, try to get out of some of the questions. And there's been a whole bunch of improvements on things like that, math, the ability for the models to code, which is obviously super important for people who care about developer stuff. So it's been a lot of listening and sort of iterating on the feedback that we've been getting from the ecosystem.
So you briefly said math. Can we talk more about that? What are kind of the new improvements to math and possibly reasoning for these models?
Yeah, this is one of the most tricky things, and we were sort of even talking internally about how do we expose some of the nuance of what makes these models better at math to sort of a general audience. And I think it is somewhat of an open problem. At least the examples that I've seen is math that's much beyond my capability. Who's someone who's taken 3 calculus classes. So there's a lot of in general the model is just better at doing math problems, which I think generalizes to a bunch of domains in which you sort of have to, think more deeply about the problem space that you're trying to solve. But the actual examples of the model being better at actually doing math is not super practical of a use case, because you probably want some system like we have with Code Interpreter that can actually just write the code and then give you a deterministic output, more so than you would want the model to just take a raw shot at trying to solve a math problem that you give it. But again, I think to your point, it's really the way in which math problems are solved in that sort of step-by-step iterative process, which is I think the sort of exciting takeaway from the math improvements.
Yeah, I think the key here with all the math and reasoning improvements is the progress. Um, and can you kind of explain maybe again to the non-technical audience and why this progress actually matters and what it might mean a year from now?
Yeah. I think a lot of the AI applications that are built today are like generally work well when you go to do that sort of demo use case. I think the time from first building something or first trying something to sort of having that magic, wow, this is incredible moment is actually probably the shortest of most of the recent technology trends that we've seen. The challenging part is like getting it from that aha demo moment to something that you would like reasonably want to put in front of your customers on like a very large scale is like actually a really long process. So all of these the sort of the progress is directionally aligned with make it so that more people can actually put this stuff into their products. Building cool demos is awesome, and I love cool demos more than anyone. But actually, the way that the technology has value for developers, for startups, for end users is by being robust and reliable. And I think that's the sort of general trajectory that we're on right now.
Yeah, and on trajectory, can you kind of maybe talk more about what the importance is of getting all the new versions of Gemini into the hands of developers quickly?
Yeah, this is to your point about whether or not we're shipping faster or not. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I have the perspective because as long as I've been at Google, we've been shipping so quickly. So I'm sure there was a lot of people who were moving super fast before. I think the developer angle of this is something that was an immediate thing that stood out to me when I joined Google. When I was chatting with folks on the DeepMind side, like they were like, yeah, how do we make these models better for developers? We care so much about this. These are the ultimate end users of folks who are leveraging our models. What can we take action on? So I think all of these experimental models that we've done and testing them on LMSys, getting them in the hands of developers, putting them in AI Studio, we've actually seen a bunch of very, very interesting trends about like what models people like. Like for example, some of the experimental models are like the most used models on AI Studio. So people are like really showing up and sort of intentionally trying to search out those models, even though it's maybe not the easiest thing in the world to do, because they've sort of heard and are actually seeing the improvements. I see like this, we just launched this side-by-side mode in AI Studio and like people are putting the models side by side and you can actually genuinely see that like the model is better at solving this, a whole host of new problems, which at the end of the day is what developers like to see. That sort of progress, that continual movement towards the direction is just really easy to get behind, and it's also what gets me excited as as all the long hours, the late nights, the early mornings for a ton of people at Google to make all this stuff possible.
Yeah, the pace recently again has been incredible to witness. It's been amazing. Can you share an example or some maybe impressive use cases for how customers or users are using these experimental models of Gemini in the real world?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, one of the challenges, and this is why it's been so important to get these models out into the hands of more developers, like through this like production ready version, is that the rate limits on the experimental models are so low that like you can't even use them for anything. It's like a couple of requests per minute or something like that. So developers haven't been able to even in some cases assess the full impact of how important these new models are going to be. I think very directionally, it's like, you can swap out on a couple of request basis and see like, oh, this model is actually generally better at, specifically a bunch of the vision stuff is what I'm most excited about. If you look at sort of the core premise for when Gemini was originally created less than a year ago, which is still crazy to think about. The first model came out in December of last year. The intent was build a multimodal model from the ground up. Like it wasn't a text model that we just bolted on the ability for it to understand images. And really, I think that's because the order of magnitude of important use cases for the world and for developers and for people who want to build with this technology. So many of them are multimodal. And it continues to be like one of the things that our models are most differentiated on is the ability to understand images and do bounding boxes and really have the sort of, taken video, I think is one of the cool things that is completely like video is just so hard to like grok all of the details, and being able to go into AI Studio and just, I do this all the time with my own videos, is like just drop an hour-long video in there and ask a bunch of questions. Like that's so, it's such a mind-blowing experience to just see it work, and also like be able to try it for free. I love it.
Yeah, and I guess kind of looking forward, what are some of those interesting unsolved real world problems that you're most excited for, like these breakthroughs in math and reasoning and new updates to Gemini to solve?
I still think we're so early in this agentic workflow world, and I've had so many conversations with like companies that are trying to solve the agent problem, people who are actually trying to like build agents themselves, and there's so many rough edges still. But it really does feel like we're probably a couple cranks of the model away from a lot of those use cases just like working out of the box. And I think like directionally this latest release like is going to be better for folks who are doing those things, especially when you start to think about what are a lot of the failure cases for agents today is actually like, the model is trying to go and look at screens and understand like, how do I move around and click on buttons and stuff like that. And very directionally, like, the models being great at vision is ultimately the unlock for like how you and me and everyone else like interact with a lot of the world. And I'm super excited to see, those vision use cases continue to work, and like also all the long context improvements. There's so much. And part of this is just like the challenge for long context with Gemini is it actually goes against a lot of the conventional wisdom for developers, which is like, don't put tokens in the context window. And then we're coming along and saying, hey, put a bunch of tokens in the context window because you can actually do all these really, really interesting things. And I think we're slowly getting around the adoption curve of getting people getting their head wrapped around what's possible with long context. And I still don't think, just like talking to people who are actually using long context in production, like we're still barely scratching the surface of what that's going to unlock. And today's release, and actually there was a paper that came out from the DeepMind team a couple days ago now, about some of the long context improvements. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we're pushing on there as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think even for developers, but even for consumers and businesses, we're just scratching the surface of what's possible with today's models. And this isn't even talking about like the future updates and all these updates you're making to Gemini. Like you said, we're just scratching the surface of what's truly possible, like not just context windows, but for LLMs in general. Let's talk specifically about why developers should build with Gemini 1.5. So addition to the new updates, higher rate limits, expanded feature access, and obviously the famously high context windows we were just talking about. But what other capabilities or features does Gemini 1.5 offer that developers should be really excited about?
It is long context, it is multimodal, but also like a bunch of like feature specific things. Like we've had, we were the first to ship context caching, which sort of eliminates a lot of the sort of financial burden for developers who are building stuff in production, especially with longer context prompts and examples and data and stuff like that, where you could just sort of pay a flat fee to store your tokens on an hour by hour basis, and then all the incremental tokens that you pass in on top of that is like a significantly reduced rate. I think that continues to get me excited. I think fine tuning is another piece of this. Like one of the big differentiators is you can come to Gemini, you can come to AI Studio, fine tune Gemini 1.5 Flash for free, and then ultimately put that model into production and pay the same sort of extremely competitive per million token cost that we have. Like there's no incremental cost to use a fine-tuned model, which is super differentiated in the ecosystem. Like no one else is providing that. And again, all of this is angled towards how do we give developers more freedom to build and less, burden to build with AI technology. And part of my perspective is the financial burden to build with AI is like one of the rate limiters of this technology being accessible and ultimately like providing the most amount of value it can be to the world. And we, our strategy to combat this is like we have the most generous free tier of any language model that exists in the world, specifically because we think there's all this cool stuff that can be built that hasn't been built yet, mostly because developers have had to show up and put a credit card in or pay some amount of money to like get started building. And with AI Studio, you can literally just show up, sign in with your Gmail account or your Google account or whatever it is, and then get an API key and start building, which I, as a developer, love to see us doing and pushing in that direction.
Yeah, so it's like in sum, it's cheaper than ever to build with Gemini, and it's the cheapest platform to build on.
Yeah, and I think like it's beyond it just being the cheapest. It's also the sort of trade-offs, specifically with like Flash as an example, like per token or like token per intelligence unit or whatever the metric of like that takes into account capabilities and cost is like the best of any model that exists today. And I think with our with the price decrease in 1.5 Pro, I actually think the same is true for 1.5 Pro too now, and that sort of higher intelligence class of models where like per token intelligence unit basis or whatever. I don't know. We need to come up with a scientific term for whatever this is. I think Pro is just like the best value as a developer to build with, all things considered, which I love. And I do think as people actually ramp up that maturity curve of, going from prototype to production, I think those things actually start to matter. And the feedback that I hear from developers all the time is, it's still so cost prohibitive. It's still, and like the models are like generally really good at a bunch of use cases. Like most models are generally really good at a bunch of use cases. And we're looking for the thing that, ultimately isn't going to create a financial burden for our team or our company or the startup or whatever it is, which I love.
Yeah, I think what's really, really cool with the age of AI, and I mean with the amazing work you guys are doing, is seeing anyone, like even people who are not technical, being able to build their own AI apps. And now with Gemini, it's even cheaper. So yeah, it's really cool seeing all this happening. If someone were to start from zero, like complete beginner, non-technical person, maybe even a student, is there like a tool stack, documentation, courses, videos, or maybe tutorials from Google that you would recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ai.google.dev is our like default landing page that also links out to the Gemini API documentation. There's a ton of stuff out there. On GitHub, we have a quick start repo where you can literally run like 4 commands and basically have like a local version of AI Studio and Gemini running on your computer and play around with the models and upload images and have that sort of experience. It's like, a couple hundred lines of code. I think the beautiful thing about, to your point about, the technology becoming more accessible to a wider audience of, not only is there a bunch of like low no code tools that are making it easier for people to build, but also for people who are actually just coding, the models continually getting better at understanding code and writing code, continues to bring the barrier down. I feel this way as someone who is formerly a software engineer, where like I really can go and tackle 10x more difficult problems now because I have AI as a co-pilot. And I think there's for the person who's never coded before, they're now able to tackle like any problem with code because they have this co-pilot in their hands. And that's also why like code, the ability for the models to be good at code, I think is like critically important, because even for some of those future low no code use cases, the model is probably going to be generating that code on the fly behind the scenes. So the code still has to be written somewhere. It's just a question of like how abstracted away is it from the user. So code quality is, a North Star.
I mean, it's amazing what you guys are doing again. Kind of last question on the sort of advice segment of this conversation. Do you have any advice for the next generation of students or businesses on not only to future-proof themselves, but how to thrive in kind of this new age of AI on the internet?
The sort of saying that has been said many times that has always resonated with me is, people are really worried about AI, taking a job in the future or replacing a human or that type of thing. And I think like the very practical reality is like, and this is the trend that's playing out today too, which is AI is a tool to be put in the hands of humans. And I think like the most successful individual contributors, creators, managers in the future, designers, all of those roles, the people who are most successful are the people who are going to be building with AI tools and using them to get the most leverage possible. I also think like the beautiful thing for students is that you sort of have a little bit more freedom in a lot of cases to use these tools. And I felt this way, you work in a company or you work for someone. Sometimes there's like limitations on like technically what tools you're able to use in whatever your company is, your organization. I think the cool thing for students is like go and use all the tools, like really get an understanding of what's out there, and like you're not limited by any of those like constraints yet. And then ultimately when you show up and you have your first job or your internship, like you have a really great purview and you can sort of be that person to teach all the folks that you work with about what's the cutting edge thing, because it is. And to the point of like why I think the work that you do, Rowan, provides so much value in the ecosystem. It's like it's hard to keep up with all the things that are happening, and if you really have some experience and refined perspective from using these tools and building with AI, like it's so much value to be shared with other people. So go and share that value.
That's an amazing answer, and I appreciate the kind words. I agree. I think uh, in the age of AI, we're so early. We're just so early, and there's so many people, a shockingly amount of people that don't really know what's happening or aren't really keeping up. So again, if people are keeping up with things, they're just so much farther ahead. At least myself, I'm like addicted to X or Twitter, and it's so easy to get caught up in that bubble of like everyone knows everything, but in reality, like if you're keeping up with things on X, if you're keeping up with things, reading newsletters, keeping up with YouTube videos, watching podcasts like this, you're probably already in the 1% of early adopters. We're just so early. So yeah, it's an amazing time, and it's also an amazing time to learn. Like it's so much easier than ever to learn too. Like just follow your curiosity and see where it takes you.
The learning angle really quick. Like I think Google also just released last week. This isn't something that's a part of the Gemini API, but this audio overviews
Yeah.
experience, which I saw you posting about. I think
Yeah.
through this thread of learning, like people were incredibly excited to be able to just throw a bunch of documents and data into Notebook LM and have this like really lifelike podcast conversation generated. And I've seen some like really cool examples of people. The one that I put together was potatoes, which I care zero about and was not an interesting topic. And then it like brought the whole conversation to life. And I spent 11 minutes listening, the longest time in my life, listening to like the origin and history and biology of potatoes.
Yeah, audio overviews was very impressive when I tried it. And that's an amazing point on like learning, right? A lot of people are auditory learners, and having audio overviews there is like, hey, you can drop anything in here and it'll turn it into an engaging conversation that you just listen to. If people are listening to this and they don't really know the example that I shared, I basically took the entire newsletter, and we don't have a newsletter sorry, we don't have a podcast on our newsletter, but I took the entire newsletter for the day and I dropped it in there, and it didn't just like read it out. Like audio overviews literally created a two-way conversation from that, which is really cool. And it's way more engaging to listen to that than just like having an audio recording of my newsletter.
And the core the like core thing that's powering that experience like is Gemini and long context. Like the thing that actually makes it interesting is you stick a bunch of disparate data sources, 10 PDFs, a Word document. I don't know if they actually accept video or not, but like you take a bunch of that data, you dump it in there, and like it uses Gemini behind the scenes. And I think this is like actually probably one of the most successful long context use cases that we've seen like really gain adoption. I don't know. I think we're, as humans, intrinsically used to now like interfaces just like let us drag around big blotches of data, and like we don't really think twice about it. But for it to actually like abstract the nuance of the data that's in there and bring it to life is I'm actually hopeful from like a developer perspective. We'll kind of show people what's possible with actually making use of long context in all these like new paradigms.
Yeah, and again, to that point of just being so early, like the capabilities of these things are so amazing, but it'll take time to really explore them all. And also to your point of like, your example, my example being potatoes for what people are really already doing with this. Can you kind of share some of those use cases that you're seeing that are like kind of mind blowing for audio overviews? And also, can you just like say where people can access it? Because I think a lot of people listening are gonna want to try it.
Yeah, I think it's just notebooklm.google.com is the website, and I have not heard a more boring example than potatoes. So imagine anything more interesting than potatoes. I've seen people putting like AI papers, and you mentioned your newsletter. There's a lot of like actually probably engaging content that's much more interesting than potatoes. But potatoes for me was like a great baseline where like you can basically make anything interesting with this. And I saw a bunch of people talking about their kids and the education impacts back to the thread from before. So there's a lot of it's going to be the future is bright. I think honestly, like to the point of this technology impacting people in a positive way. I think like if the only thing that it does is make it easier to learn a bunch of stuff and bring a bunch of like not super engaging content to life like that, I think that'd be a huge impact for AI, independent of all the other future stuff that's going to come. And I feel like part of the challenge is we're always so future looking of the next iteration, that it's difficult to like actually grok and take advantage of like the things that are there already today and all the value that could be created.
I completely agree. I think yeah, education is one of those spaces right now where AI is really, really putting impact on, and again, it's just not being explored enough. So yeah, I love these little features like audio overviews, which is yeah, it's just amazing for so many people. Um, let's talk about AI agents. Uh, so with the rapid progress, and obviously with the updates to Gemini, you said we're going to get to these agentic capabilities soon. And it's obviously kind of like the next stage for AI. We know it's coming. Can you kind of explain your definition for an agent? Because I think sometimes the term is a little unclear. So can you just define that first, and then we'll talk about it?
Yeah, I think the one of the challenges of today's age is unlike definitions like artificial intelligence or machine learning, where there's like a Merriam-Webster dictionary definition. I feel like agents has this like uh, you know, zeitgeist, like cultural ecosystem moment where like everyone actually defines it differently. I think for me, when I see agentic workflows, it's like really a system that's able to take action on your behalf, and like actually do something for you. And today in the world of Gemini, like developers have to do a lot of the heavy lifting themselves. You might use Gemini in an agentic workflow, or use some other framework that helps you sort of build the plumbing to do agents. But we don't have any of that, at least in the Gemini API ourselves. So it's really like, we put the tool in the hands of the model in the hands of developers, and then they go sort of build all the stuff. And I think part of this is intentional because it's, there's 1,001 agent frameworks, there's 1,001 companies building agents, and it's like actually not super clear. Like even to me as someone who spends too much of my waking moments, on X, to your point, Rowan, of seeing all the demos and playing around with all the products. Like it still feels like we're really early in what that paradigm might be. So I think for us historically, like the highest leverage thing that we could do is put a great model into the hands of developers to power a bunch of these use cases, let the ecosystem develop a little bit more, and hopefully figure out where the gaps are, where we can add value from a developer perspective in the future, but not wanting to sort of put something from our perspective out too early that isn't going to end up resonating with developers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're kind of seeing that now, like you said, with all these frameworks, is they're not that capable, right? But they're starting to get there. You can start to see these things happening, and with all these updates, these models, it's clearly getting closer. But I guess that's my follow-up question is how close do you think we really are to the ChatGPT moment for these agent systems? And do you think we'll see a massive consumer boom for them, similar to what we saw in 2022?
I think part of what has made this current moment of AI have the wow moment is actually like how easy it is for for you to get value without putting in a lot of effort. And I think a lot of the challenge for agentic systems and products is actually that like for me to get value out of a agent that reads my calendar and my email, like there is some amount of like incremental friction to like give it the right access, kind of put some amount of guardrails. Like it has to be, and I've actually seen this commentary from a bunch of people who have executive assistants or that type of role, or like people who support them as an individual. And the comment from some of those folks was like, you know, anyone who thinks that like agents are just going to like magically solve all their problems, like people have human agent equivalents today, and like it's actually difficult to effectively make use of even another human who's fully AGI, artificial superintelligence, can do everything you need, has full modality access, interacts in the real world, all those things. It's hard to make like really coherent use of another human to support you. So I don't my expectations are somewhat measured about like whether or not there'll be that like massive viral moment. I think there will be a bunch of things that like provide a ton of value for people. And like, that's actually already happening today. There's tons of products out there that like for very domain specific tasks, they're somewhat agentic. They go and solve a problem that usually would have taken me as a human, like going and doing some work. But I think the magic of LLMs and sort of that chat interface is like actually the interface itself, despite it being simple and like not the best thing for a lot of stuff, it is actually sort of what brings the magicalness of that to life. So maybe there'll be that similar sort of interface moment that brings agent stuff to life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And my follow-up question is on the form factor. Do you think the final form for these agents are chat, voice? Is it something embedded into our phones? Is it, maybe glasses, earbuds? What do you think the final form factor will be for kind of these, maybe not so much the workforce agents, but more so the personalized agents that are personalized to you as a user?
Yeah, this is tough. I think it's certainly not chat. Like it won't be chat. It's unlikely actually to be like some software that a more SaaS-like application. I do think like blending the space between hardware and software and finding some way to sort of combine those two things together makes sense. And there's a ton of people who are trying to do that with all the recent boom of like AI, companion assistant hardware technologies. I do think the idea of vision makes a lot of sense. Like, folks are pushing on glasses and other things like that. And again, like for me, the way that I interact with the world is by seeing a bunch of stuff. So it would make intuitive sense for that to also be possible. But on the other hand, I don't wear glasses all day, so I'm not sure. All of these things have their drawback, and probably the not great answer, but is probably closer to the truth, is that it's going to be that sort of combination. Like there's going to be a bunch of advantages of having like the like purely software on your computer personal assistant, while also being advantages of having like the more, it might actually even physically be a robot. There's all the progress in robotics that's happening, being in your physical space, helping support you. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough question, right? We don't know, right? Really, it really depends on how the world takes it. What do you think the most surprising way AI will change our daily lives in the future? Maybe more so at the personal level rather than the workforce level.
I think, and this has been an idea that people are kicking around and working on for a while now, since the initial aha moment with LLMs. Really, the limitation on the usefulness today is that you have to take the first action as the user. And like for me, I'm not always like, there are people reaching out to me and providing value to me, and then sort of I'm providing value to them, and there's that two-way street of communication and action happening. And with most AI systems today, it's one way. Sort of I prompt the system and then it gives me a response back, or I tell it to do something and it sort of does what I might instruct it to do. I think the future is in the medium term, the most value to be unlocked is like the system actually sort of asking me to do a bunch of like asking me for permission or clarification on things that I might want it to go do, and really solving those problems. And again, this is what humans do. Like if you're, in a job or whatever, something like not to go too deep into like the work use case, but like, you know, it's probably not a uncommon question to ask your manager, okay, so what do I do next? Like the person who's there to help sort of guide you and make you successful. Like it's actually very interesting to me that very few AI systems, if any today, like successfully do that, like asking me how they can help in like a actual, not surface level way, and in a way that ends up being meaningful. So it'll be interesting to see more systems combine that in. And I think back to the thread of like the technology to do that already exists. Like you could stick a ton of stuff into the context window of a model and have it sort of behind the scenes on a preset schedule, just like come up with questions and possible actions or things that the model might do. There doesn't need to be any net new innovation. Like the model's already capable of doing that. It's just a matter of like stringing up the system to be able to do that.
I mean, that's really, really cool and a great point. If the agents become proactive, right, and they're actually looking at your data, understanding you as a user, and asking you to do things, I think that's a really, really cool time to be in. Do you think Gemini and Google is ahead with their context windows? And do you think that's a significant advantage in this new agent era?
I think it is a significant advantage. I do think context caching is a huge unlock. It's harder to quantify the delta in like performance for multimodal, but I think like video is another example. Like very few models today actually take in video and understand the audio and the images and the text associated with it. So I think those things will continue to be compounded. And also like my personal thesis is that's where a lot of the value, like the frontier use cases are where the value is going to be created. Like people are like, even consumers are like very used to this, like, basic chat experience. And for people who are building with the technology, the way that you get people excited and like get them in the door is I've built something new that other people haven't built or that you might not have seen before. So we're, and again, I'm happy that like Gemini and the DeepMind team and us are like pushing on those use cases so that developers have those, net new things to put in front of consumers and help them like get in the door and build value for their business.
Do you think we'll ever see infinite context windows?
I think if I think it's likely possible. We'll see. I think infinite is like a large engineering problem. They'll probably like the like actual technology could potentially scale to be infinite, but it's like, the cost associated with it gets really tough, et cetera, et cetera. But I believe in the DeepMind team. I think Jeff Dean and the whole crew of people are continuing to do things that haven't been done before, and I think the context window stuff. I'm hoping we see land.
Yeah, I think you guys have 10 billion in research. Is that right? Or correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think a bunch of the papers have talked about what happens, or like they've tested it up to 10 million. I think there's like a bunch of like practical challenges of like putting that much context into a production environment at like a reasonable end user cost and all those types of things. So it's not available to developers, but I think continuing to push on that research and figuring it out. Like the thing that Google does best is take those really, really hard engineering problems that no one else can solve at a massive scale, and then actually make them affordable for the masses to be able to make use of whatever the technology is across search, YouTube, now with Gemini, all these other things. So I think it's the unique trait that in the world of AI I think is gonna keep pushing us.
Yeah, I mean the Google DeepMind team has just been amazing. Again, like we talked about this earlier, but the pace has been crazy to witness. Maybe for non-technical people, can you kind of explain like the promise of like what this infinite context window might mean for them?
Yeah, I think right now you have to essentially models only reason about information that's in the context window. So you ask the model a question. If it's not in the context window, or if it's not in sort of the distillation of the information that the model's been trained on, it won't be able to take action on it. And the unique thing for humans is that both we have this massive amount of context, and we continue to sort of pile on context in our own minds and brains as we learn and go about our days. But also we have the tools to go and like dynamically retrieve a bunch of additional context and use that to take an action. And today's AI systems, basically you as the user need to do all the retrieving and putting in the context. But also the models are historically not that great at figuring out what the relevant context is. So like as someone trying to solve a math problem, for example, like know what context I might need to go and get to solve that math problem. And I think there's actually that translation layer between knowing what you don't know actually is one of the big limitations. And you sort of you can kind of skirt around the knowing what you don't know problem if you just can put everything in the context window. If I can take all the text messages I've ever sent, all the emails that I've ever sent, every document that I've ever created, and put it in the context window, it actually becomes a little bit easier technically to not have to put as much like energy and thought into like what specifically should the models be taking action on.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And kind of the last topic I want to touch on is AGI. So obviously this is the end goal. Can you explain, again, similar to agents, the term is pretty loose. Can you explain what AGI is in your eyes?
Yeah, this is another one of those challenges where like we need Merriam-Webster to come in and like delineate the real definition of AGI. I think there's a bunch of different framings. I think a framing that's resonated with me historically is like models that are able to do some reasonable portion of like economically productive work that humans are able to do, sort of as a proxy for how useful these systems are. I think ultimately it comes to like usefulness of the system, and people use economic productivity as the proxy for that. Whether or not that's right or the good definition is something we need Merriam-Webster to delineate for us. But I think in general, like that's the definition that resonates with me, is like systems that can do the things that I'm able to do.
And what's next on the roadmap? What's the current bottlenecks to AGI?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of the things that like we've already talked about. Like I think the models being really good at being able to understand visually the things that are happening. I think longer context is like, again, I don't know what the human number of tokens that we can keep in our mind and like have in our brains, but I'd imagine it's a lot more than 2 million. So like you're going to need sort of all of these similar capabilities that we have today to like continue to ramp up, plus a bunch of net new stuff. And I think the thing that gets me excited is all of the net new stuff is a lot of the work that the Google DeepMind team has been doing like extensively for the last 10 years with all of the planning with AlphaGo and sort of the strategic reinforcement learning stuff that they've done, which it's likely that some amount of that is going to be extremely relevant for this to getting us to AGI. And like the team has the bandwidth and the expertise and has been doing that research, and I'm excited to see a bunch of those things like come together and and get us closer to systems that ultimately like developers are going to get to build really, really interesting products with. And I think this is my other tangential comment to this, which is the most challenging thing I think for me personally working with this technology is always that there's so many cool products to be built that it's like, you have the idea as you're coming up with use cases for, what's the new stuff that's being unlocked by the latest iteration of Gemini models, like even for me in the last couple of weeks. And it's like, well, there's a lot of really interesting companies that you could go and build or products to be built with this stuff. So I'm super excited to see both people take action on the current stuff, but also like that trend just continues, and it keeps me so optimistic for the future and for people who are excited about building stuff. Like there's just every new crank of the model is just all of these really interesting new unlocks.
It's just amazing where we're at right now, and how kind of seemingly close we are to the next step or the future. So right now, obviously, kind of reasoning and math breakthroughs is all the rage. How much does that play a role in the future development of AGI?
I do think the reasoning, the model's ability to think about stuff, I think makes perfect sense. Like I think that's a paradigm that, again, back to the early days of DeepMind, like that was the direction that they were pushing on for a very long time of like trying to solve these problems. In many ways, like to the sort of path to get to where we've gotten, the fact that it ended up being like transformers and large language models sort of as the proxy for some of the initial signs of what look like intelligent systems is somewhat counterintuitive. But I do think the fusion of both of those things makes perfect sense. I do think there's like practical limitations of, a lot of production use cases today, like just can't take, many seconds to reason about what the answer is. Like the humans are already so impatient. So there's like a very specific set of use cases where that type of delay in an answer for the potential upside of getting a better answer might be useful. But I think like still today, the vast majority of like the use cases that are working in production aren't those use cases. So I'm excited that we're landing models that are going to help people right now and support a bunch of the use cases that are important for developers. And I'm also excited about the future because I think there's a lot of super interesting work yet to be done.
It's been amazing talking with you, and I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, Rowan, it was great to see you. Hopefully we'll get to catch up in person before IO next year.
Let's do it.
I love it.
All right. That's the pod.